part of the anniversary of the battle, 153 years ago today. One of the most important attacks of the battle, the fighting at the Bloody Angle, had just concluded about 3 o'clock in the morning today. So today would have been, thankfully, the weather would have started clearing up because that fighting took place in the pouring rain. And the armies, however, were not done, because one of the things that characterizes the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse, following the Battle of the Wilderness just a few days before, and then on through the rest of this overland campaign, is constant contact between the armies. From May 5th, 1864 on until the armies reach the siege of Petersburg to the south of us, these folks are going to be constantly fighting. And so, how did we get here? It's 1864, much like last year, a very important year in the history of the country. Why is that?
Emancipation Proclamation.
All right, election. I also heard Emancipation Proclamation, which actually comes in 1863, but it's still a factor because it wasn't all that popular among everybody, of course, during the war. But yeah, we have an election. Who's up for re-election? Abraham Lincoln. What happens if Lincoln doesn't get re-elected?
Someone who's likely to end the war, try to end the war, is going to be elected. It will be someone not. So
All
I'm
right.
trying to make peace with the South. Mostly.
So if Lincoln loses, whoever wins is probably going to end up suing for peace with the Confederacy, and right now we'd be standing in, presumably, the Confederate States of America. So it's fairly important to us, in the future of our country, that Abraham Lincoln gets re-elected. In 1864, that's very important to the Union cause. We can't separate the military action on the battlefield from what's happening politically. So it becomes absolutely critical for the commanders in the field in the spring of 1864 to start winning victories. They need to prove that the Union war effort is going well, and that you should, in fact, vote for Lincoln come the fall. So, to accomplish this, we bring a new commander to the east. Ulysses S. Grant. How many of you have heard of Grant? Just a little bit famous, right? Ulysses S. Grant comes to us from the west, where he's seen a lot of hard fighting and has actually been extremely successful. Commanders here in the east, not so much for the Union Army. You have still in command of the Army of the Potomac George Gordon Meade, who commanded and won the Battle of Gettysburg in summer of 1863, but come the fall of 1863, he's not doing so well. And so, for the spring campaign season, we bring Grant in to take command of all armies. And at that point, Lincoln kind of backs off. He trusts Grant and wants to let Grant manage his own affairs. The only thing he stipulates is that Grant will face off against Lee's army with the Army of the Potomac. Grant starts to move all armies to put pressure on the Confederacy at all points here in the East in a coordinated way instead of these piecemeal assaults that allow the Confederate forces to shift their troops around and to respond to each crisis and to stop and lick their wounds whenever they can. If he puts pressure on all points, constant pressure on all points, he thinks he can break the Confederate forces in the East. This campaign is going to be part of that. It's called the Overland Campaign because it essentially means these armies are going overland against each other. You've got the Union Army of the Potomac still commanded by Meade, but now with Grant making his headquarters with that army, putting pressure on that army to do good work, to basically pursue Lee overland all the way to Richmond, hopefully. So, as this army begins its movement south, Grant wants to get into open ground where he can really battle Lee. He's not able to do so because Lee traps him in the wilderness, just about 8 or 10 miles to the north of us. They fight there for 2 days and end in stalemate. Now, I don't know if any of you know anyone like this, but I say that my brother, surprisingly enough, is a little bit like Ulysses S. Grant. If you ever play my brother in a board game, he never loses. Even when he loses, which is rare, he never loses. I don't know how he does it. I'm just one of those people that refuses to lose. And Ulysses S. Grant is the same way. So when his army meets stalemate in the wilderness, it doesn't matter. He didn't lose. He just keeps moving. And so on May 7th, on that evening, he'll start to pull his men up out of their entrenchments at the wilderness and start their march south. He aims for Spotsylvania Courthouse, which is just a little ways down the road this way, because it has a critical crossroads that would take him to Richmond. He knows if he can get close to Richmond, if he can threaten Richmond, all the politicians there are going to get a little bit upset and force Robert E. Lee out to fight him. So he keeps moving on Richmond, he keeps moving south. Now he encounters a bit of a problem because even though he gets the jump on Robert E. Lee for moving south, Lee has a few good guesses as to where Grant might go. He decides to hedge his bets and block the path to Spotsylvania Courthouse. It's his safest move. And so, Grant finds his movement all the way south to Spotsylvania Courthouse being blocked by cavalry. They're harassing the columns as they move south, and you might think, well, that's fine. The Union Army has cavalry too. Surely they would respond. Except the cavalry here has a brand new commander named Phil Sheridan. Phil Sheridan, I love the descriptions of him because the poor fellow is actually very short, and people make fun of him for it a lot. But he's a very capable commander, but his theories on cavalry use don't really line up with the way the Army of the Potomac has used its cavalry to this point. Usually you use your cavalry to screen, to guard your flanks, and to lead an advance. Phil Sheridan sees the cavalry as a striking force. He doesn't want to get bogged down in brushing away Confederate cavalry on their way south. So he steps back. And even though George Meade orders him into the fight to clear the road, he clears the road so far, and then he steps back and lets the infantry go forward. Usually in a stand-up fight, infantry can push cavalry like nobody's business. But then the cavalry just hops on their horses, goes a mile down the road, sets up another blockade. So it moves very, very slowly. And the Confederates, in the meantime, their infantry forces are moving to get themselves into place to block this advance. Partly by accident. The men of the 1st Confederate Corps actually march through the night because they can't find a good place to camp. The woods of the wilderness are on fire, and as they're getting themselves out of the wilderness, they can't find a place to stop where the smoke is too thick and the flames aren't actually causing them great danger. So they march through the night, and they are able to get right behind the Confederate cavalry just down the road here. So we're standing right now where the battle opens. We're right alongside the Brock Road. Most of you, if not all of you, came in on the Brock Road. It's one of the major north-south veins in this area, and it is the Union Army's way south to Spotsylvania Courthouse. As they're moving through this area, they've been fighting against the Confederate cavalry constantly, and they're looking for a means of breaking through. The infantry is now at the front, and they should be able to push this cavalry like no problem. The difficulty is, you see that far ridge line, where the trees are, where we're about to head, it's actually occupied by Confederate infantry now. They finally, the Confederate cavalry has delayed the Union advance long enough that the infantry could get itself into place. So when the attack goes across the field, we have a bit of a problem. As the Union forces go forward here, they're under the command of Gouverneur K. Warren, his 5th Corps, moving forward, and he thinks he's got cavalry in his front. He thinks this shouldn't be a problem. So when his troops are struggling, he calls to them, never mind cannon, never mind bullets, press on and clear this road. Because that's their goal, right? Push right on through and get themselves to Spotsylvania Courthouse. But they find actually that they're going to encounter Confederate infantry, and the task is a lot harder than they thought. Their attack is going to be repulsed. They try a couple more times, but it turns out they're just not going to be able to get enough advantage. So they fall back to their lines right here, which we'll walk alongside after we make our loop around through the field. They'll try attacks again on May 10th and May 12th. Also unsuccessful. All the fighting out here in this field ends in stalemate. For better or for worse, the lines will start to spread out in either direction. Because their goal, again, still to break through, still to move south. And if it won't be in this field, it must be in another field nearby. So as the lines spread out, you'll see that they start to form a very different kind of line. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. But for now, we're also going to focus for a minute here on this monument. It's worth noting. This is a monument to John Sedgwick. Sedgwick was killed on May 9th, the next day, while these armies are still in constant contact. There isn't really a lot of fighting that goes on. I didn't mention an attack in this area on May 9th, but there's a lot of sharpshooting between the lines. The Confederates are still just on that high ground. Union forces still on this high ground. And as they're sharpshooting at each other, Sedgwick is telling his men to stop dodging. That the Confederates couldn't hit an elephant at this distance, and then he's shot just below the eye. He's killed very quickly, and it shows the dangers of this constant campaigning, that they're constantly under fire. Even though Sedgwick isn't killed at the head of the charge, he's still a casualty of this battle. And he was the highest-ranking Union officer killed during the war. A pretty big deal. And he was very much beloved by his staff. They called him Uncle John. One man said the dismay of General Sedgwick's staff was a personal feeling. He was like a kind father to them, and they loved him really like sons. So, the loss of Sedgwick is truly significant out here. But, that's a good question. I understand there's a British round that starts with a W. Does anybody else know off the top of their head? I couldn't tell you the caliber. I can tell you that it was a sharpshooter's bullet. If you want, I can look it up for you later. They do know the actual type of round.